Good morning, 5th grade. Today we are going to be reading an article about Civil War ballooning because there's a part in chapter 27 that we're going to read today that has to do with ballooning. So we want to give you guys some good background knowledge on how they used hot air balloons during the Civil War. Before we get started, we're going to do our fill in the blank summary of chapter 26. Be ready to fill in the blanks as I read the top part aloud. As Homer and the members of the traveling show are making their way down the road, they see a black wagon carrying dead soldiers back to their homes to be buried. The wagon has broken down, and Mr. Fleabottom offers to let Tally and Bern repair it. Mr. Fleabottom starts a conversation with the driver of the wagon about what is going on in the war so far. Homer hopes that Harold does not come home in a black wagon. Today in our parallel teaching lesson, we're going to focus on what inferences can we make about Homer based on evidence from the text. But when you're reading your educated, you're going to be collecting evidence about the role that ballooning played in the Civil War. So our focus for educated is different than our focus for the whole group lesson. In the whole group lesson, we'll need these three words: recognizance, that is basically when the military spies on the enemy forces. They go undercover. So you see these soldiers are wearing camouflage. Number 2 is disband. That's when you break apart a group or part of the group, stops functioning. So that would be this picture. This blue and red group has disband into one blue group and one red group. And then last is durable. That describes something that is able to withstand, wear and tear. So we have these iPhones that have the OtterBox around them, which makes them more durable. All right, so I need you to turn in your notes page if you need to tear apart your packet so that you can have your text on one side and the answer sheet on the other. Please do that now. And then I need you at the top of your text that says Civil War ballooning, and I want you to create a how or why question. So I'm thinking, how were balloons used during the Civil War? Why were balloons used during the Civil War? Go ahead and write that at the top near the title. And then we're only going to read the sections of the article that have the stars by them. And then we're going to stop and answer our questions. So the structure of this text is question answer. It's describing the role that balloons played in the Civil War. And so it has a question, and then the author answers the question right below. So I'm at the first question: were balloons used by world militaries before the American Civil War? All right, the French Committee of Public Safety created a Corps of Aeronautics in 1794, intended to conduct aerial reconnaissance. Hang on, I'm looking for the article. This is too small for me to read on the screen. Here we go. Intended to conduct aerial reconnaissance. Aerial is another word. It means air. So if they're doing aerial reconnaissance, that means they are spying from above. They are in the air spying. The balloons first went into action during the battles of Charleroi and Fleurus later that year. The Corps remained in service until it was disbanded during the Egyptian campaign. Lowe's Aeronautic Corps was the second major international experiment in airborne battlefield reconnaissance. And so General Low was an American during the Civil War who led the fleet of hot air balloons, also known as the Aeronautic Corps. All right, let's keep going. What role did balloons play in the Civil War? And this is where, in the next couple of paragraphs, this is where we're going to find our answers to 1A and 1B. All right? So what role did balloons play during the Civil War? The balloons and aeronauts are people who fly the balloons, conducted aerial reconnaissance and artillery spotting. With the ability to soar 1,000 feet above the landscape, balloons gave military leaders a platform that allowed them to see for miles around, and a decided advantage, especially in areas with little topography. Topography means hills or mountains. So it was easy for the people in the hot air balloons to see the enemy troops below if the area they were over wasn't very hilly. During the 7 Days campaign in 1862, Union balloons stationed at Gaines Farm could observe movement within downtown Richmond, which was roughly 7 miles away. Okay, so when we're thinking about, why did they use balloons during the Civil War, we know it was to, if we go back in our text, in this first sentence, it says, to conduct aerial reconnaissance and artillery spotting. So each side wanted to be able to see the other side's troops and where they were headed next. If they could predict where they were headed next, then they would be able to get their troops there or alert the troops so they wouldn't be surprised. And they could better prepare for the battle. So for 1A, why did the Union and Confederate armies use hot air balloons during the Civil War? They used them to spy on the other side, so they could predict where they were moving next. And this allowed them to be more prepared for battle. All right, let's keep reading. The next question asks us, how did the Union and Confederate armies use hot air balloons during the Civil War? So what exactly were they doing when they were using them? So we're at, did both sides use the balloons? Both sides used balloons, although the Union aeronautical program was far more successful and better organized. Next section. Were the balloons used in the Civil War? Purpose built for military use. So this is how they used them. Thaddeus Lowe designed especially tough balloons to use with the Army. They were constructed of more durable material and also flown by civilian aeronauts. Okay, so we know they used more durable balloons. Let's keep going to collect more evidence for how did they use the balloons during the Civil War. This section says, did they use balloons in both the Eastern and Western theaters of the Civil War? So again, where were they using balloons? Only in the East, only in the West, or in every part of where the war was going on? Balloons were used in the Eastern theater to some extent on the western rivers and along the southern coast. Union balloons were employed around D.C. and Manassas in 1861. Used extensively during 1862 Pennsylvania campaign and employed during the Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville campaigns. In the Western Theater, balloons were used to support the campaign against Island No. 10 in the Mississippi River. Confederate balloons were employed around Richmond during the 7 Days campaign. Okay, so when we're thinking about how did the Union and Confederate armies use their hot air balloons, we know they used a more durable fabric, and they were employed during many battles in the Eastern and Western theaters. Silently write down your answer, plus press pause if you need more time. And then we're going to go to this section at the bottom of the page that's not starred, but we'll find the answer to number 2 in it. Number 2 says, how were the hot air balloons able to hold people? Okay, be ready to underline your answer. The largest balloons, Union and Intrepid, had a capacity of 32,000 cubic feet of lifting gas and could carry 5 people aloft. Constitution in the United States had 25,000 cubic foot envelopes and could carry up to 3 people. Washington had 20,000 cubic foot bag and could carry 2 people aloft. With the capacity of 15,000 cubic feet each, Eagle and Excelsior were a one-man craft. Small balloons could be inflated and sent skyward in a shorter amount of time. Larger balloons carried more observers and could include telegraphers and their gear. Go to the top of the next page. What did they inflate the Civil War balloons with, and how did they inflate balloons out in the field? Balloons were normally inflated with city gas when it was available, as in Washington and Richmond. In the field, Thaddeus Sloan designed the Navy Yard constructed special inflation wagons. Charged with dilute sulfuric acid and iron fillings, they generated hydrogen. These portable gas generation wagons gave the Union balloonists the ability to deploy more freely in the field. Okay, so if we go back, we know that how were the balloons able to hold people? Well, they had a special gas that made them float into the air. And if we go back and reread this section, we know that the gas that they used is dilute sulfuric acid and iron fillings that generated hydrogen. So when you're saying how were the hot air balloons able to hold people, you could say the hot air balloons were filled with diluted sulfuric acid and iron filings that generated hydrogen. This allowed them to float in the air. Okay, for the next, we're going to read this next section, and we really want to pay attention to the word tethered. In this section, we're trying to figure out what does the word tethered mean. It says, could Civil War balloons fly in an independent, or were they someone tied to the ground? With the exception of John LeMountain flights, Civil War balloons were always intended to be tethered to the ground. There were accidents, however, and in the famous flight of Fitz John Porter over the Confederate lines and back again. Great, so we're trying to think, what does it mean to be tethered? And if we look back in the sentence, it says, tethered to the ground. And if we can even use this picture to help us with our context clues, tethered. If something is tethered to the ground, that means it has a rope that is attached to the ground. So another word for tethered could mean tied to the ground. And the context clues that helped you are the phrase to the ground. And this picture that has ropes tied to the basket and then attached to the ground. When you're thinking about number 4, I want you to read this section right here that says, did senior military leaders value balloons? Go ahead and get started.